There is a cruel truth Carl Jung discovered. The very qualities that make you most alive, most radiant, most authentic, are the same ones that can make you a target. Jung called it shadow projection. It is the paradox every empath eventually faces. Why is it that the people who are most open, most compassionate, most deeply feeling so often attract resentment instead of appreciation? Why is your greatest gift also the source of your deepest pain? Think about it. You walk into a room quietly. You're not trying to dominate. You're not demanding attention. And yet, the atmosphere shifts. Some people are drawn to you immediately, like moths to a flame. They feel warmth in your presence. They open up, they confess, they even heal just by being near you. But others react with something darker. A subtle irritation, a silent judgment, a hidden contempt they will never admit out loud. They may smile politely, but inside, they resent you. Why? Why would someone resent kindness? Why would they envy authenticity? Jung found the answer in the psyche's most dangerous mechanism, the shadow. Every person carries a shadow, that dark container of everything they cannot accept in themselves. When they meet you, when they meet an empath, they are confronted not just with your light, but with their own buried wounds. Your authenticity acts like a mirror. Your very presence becomes a silent accusation. Without saying a word, you strip away the masks they depend on. And instead of facing the truth, they project that discomfort onto you. You become too sensitive. You become too much. You become the problem, when in reality, you are the reflection of what they have lost. This is the paradox of the empath. Carl Jung documented it carefully. The empath's greatest gift, their luminous ability to feel deeply and remain emotionally alive, is the very thing that others resent. Your sensitivity, your openness, your authenticity. These are the qualities that most people bury in order to survive. Jung noticed it again and again in his clinical work. Individuals with extraordinary empathic abilities would magnetize relationships that followed the same devastating pattern. At first, they were cherished, seen as safe, healing, liberating. Then, without warning, the tide would turn. Those same people would begin to criticize them, undermine them, resent them, and ultimately abandon them. Why? Because your light does something their shadow cannot tolerate. Jung called this shadow projection. The unconscious mind pushes its own unwanted qualities onto you, the empath. They resent your emotional freedom because it reminds them of their own numbness. They resent your vulnerability because it exposes their own armor. They resent your authenticity because it highlights the falseness of their own persona. The more authentic and radiant you become, the more you threaten the psychological defenses of those around you. And so they project. They blame you for emotions they have spent years burying. They punish you for being the mirror they cannot look into. Jung observed this as a recurring pattern. People are drawn to the empath like moths to a flame. But just as the moth cannot endure the fire, they eventually turn against the very light they sought. You've seen it in your own life, haven't you? People drawn to your warmth, your openness, your listening. They tell you secrets they've never told anyone. They feel safe with you. Then one day, they flip. They accuse you of being too intense, too emotional, too much. They walk away, leaving you confused, hurt, and wondering if something is wrong with you. But Jung's insight is clear. Nothing is wrong with you. What you are witnessing is the cruel paradox of being empathic. Your presence awakens what others have suppressed. Your light exposes their shadows. And instead of gratitude, you receive resentment. It is not about you. It is about what you reflect. This is why Jung said authentic emotional expression triggers unconscious shame in those who have betrayed their own emotional truth. Your empathy is not too much. Others are too numb. And until you understand this paradox, you will keep internalizing the hostility you attract. You will keep thinking their resentment means you are broken, when in reality, their resentment proves you are still whole. The empath's paradox is this: the brighter your light, the darker the shadows you call forth. The more you heal, the more you threaten. The more you remain real, the more others feel exposed. And so you become both cherished and condemned, sought after and despised, loved and hated, all for the same reason, because you refuse to abandon the very qualities they have already lost. Why do people resent empaths? Why would anyone look at kindness, openness, and authenticity and feel hostility instead of gratitude? Jung's answer was devastating in its simplicity. Authenticity exposes falseness. Sensitivity reveals numbness. Innocence confronts corruption. This is the innocence punishment dynamic Jung described. People who have lost their own emotional innocence, whether through trauma, betrayal, or social conditioning, unconsciously punish those who still carry it. The empath's light doesn't just illuminate a room. It illuminates the loss others feel but cannot admit. They do not hate you. They hate the part of themselves they have killed. They punish you for keeping alive what they have buried. Think of the wounded healer archetype. Jung observed that empaths often carry deep sensitivity not because life spared them, but because they have suffered. Your ability to feel so deeply is born of scars, not naivety. Your light was forged in darkness. Others sense this unconsciously. They know you hold a key to transformation. But instead of learning from you, many will try to siphon your energy, drain your spirit, or dim your radiance. They want your healing, but they resent the reminder of their wounds. This is why the same people who once clung to you for safety later accuse you of being too sensitive. It is projection. It is shadow at work. When they call you too much, what they really mean is that your authenticity makes their numbness unbearable. When they tell you to toughen up, what they reveal is their own trauma, their own surrender to emotional death. Jung wrote, "Authentic emotional expression triggers unconscious shame in those who have betrayed their own emotional truth." This is the root of resentment. It is not your tears, your laughter, your intensity that offends them. It is what those emotions expose in them. Imagine a mirror. When you stand in front of someone as an empath, you don't just reflect their surface image. You reflect the hidden self and the sensitivity they lost, the tenderness they suppressed, the dreams they abandoned. And staring into that mirror is unbearable. It feels like a silent accusation, as though your very existence whispers, you are not living your truth. And so they attack the mirror. They attack you. But the truth is, the mirror is not responsible for the image it reflects. This is why Jung described the empath's presence as both magnetic and threatening. You draw people in because unconsciously they long for the qualities you embody. But once they get close, their shadow resists. The warmth feels good, but the illumination feels unbearable. They want the fire without the light. They want the comfort without the truth. But you cannot separate them. Your empathy comes as a whole, warmth and illumination together. And so the cycle begins. They admire you. They confess to you. They feel healed by you. Then slowly, their admiration curdles into envy. Their gratitude turns into criticism. Their reliance becomes resentment. Eventually, they leave, but not before wounding you with words like, "You're too emotional. You take things too seriously. You're too much." Have you heard those words? Have you felt that sting? If you have, Jung would tell you this: those words were never about you. They were the echoes of someone else's shame. The tragedy is that many empaths internalize this resentment. They begin to believe it. They start to think, maybe I am too much. Maybe my feelings are wrong. Maybe my sensitivity is a flaw. And in that moment, the innocence-punishment dynamic reaches its cruelest point. The empath begins to punish themselves the way others punish them. They become their own emotional assassin. This is why Jung insisted that the resentment you attract is not a verdict against you. It is a signal of your authenticity. The criticism you face is evidence of your light. Their hostility is proof of what you awaken in them. The world will always mock what it secretly envies. It will always attack what it secretly needs. And so when people resent your empathy, remember, they are not rejecting you. They are rejecting their own abandoned emotional truth. The problem was never that you are too much. The problem is that they have become too little. Jung didn't just describe the resentment empaths attract in vague terms. He documented the exact ways it shows up in real relationships. 4 recurring patterns. 4 unconscious attack strategies that people use against empaths without even knowing why. The first is the emotional critic, what I call the feeling police. These are the people who target your emotional responses directly. They tell you you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too reactive. They try to police what you feel, as if emotions themselves are wrong. Jung noted that these individuals have suppressed their own emotions so completely that authentic feeling makes them uncomfortable. Your tears, your laughter, your intensity, it all reminds them of what they've lost. And so they criticize you, not to help you, but to silence the shame they feel inside. Have you ever been told, "Stop overreacting? You're too emotional"? That is not feedback. That is projection. The second is the authenticity attacker, what I call the performance police. These are people who resent you for being real because they've built their entire identity around masks. They've learned to survive by pretending, by conforming, by playing roles. And when you show up without pretense, it threatens their entire persona. Jung observed how people who live behind masks feel exposed in the presence of someone who doesn't need one. They attack your genuineness because it highlights their own falsehood. Have you ever dimmed your authentic self just to make others comfortable? That shrinking wasn't about you being wrong. It was about them being unable to stand next to what is real. The third type is the vulnerability violator, what I call the trust destroyers. These are people who target your openness and trust. They sense that you lead with your heart, that you are willing to be vulnerable, and they exploit it. They take advantage of your openness, and when the damage is done, they blame you for being naive. You're too trusting. You should have known better. Jung observed that these individuals are often so closed off by their own wounds that your willingness to stay open enrages them. They punish you for preserving what they have lost, the ability to trust. And then there is the most dangerous type, the light dimmer, what I call the brightness reducers. These are people who cannot tolerate your radiance at all. They work systematically to erode your confidence, to convince you that your empathy is not a gift, but a flaw. They may do it subtly, with jokes, with backhanded compliments, with manipulative concern. You're too nice, the world will eat you alive. You need to toughen up. Underneath those words is not care. but unconscious hostility. Jung documented how these people, disconnected from their own inner light, try to diminish the brightness of those who still shine. Think about it. The feeling police tell you your emotions are wrong. The performance police tell you your authenticity is inappropriate. The trust destroyers take advantage of your openness and punish you for it. The brightness reducers try to convince you that your light itself is dangerous. 4 different strategies, but all driven by the same force: shadow projection. And here's the cruel irony. None of these people set out consciously to attack you. This isn't deliberate malice. Jung insisted it was unconscious. They are at war with themselves, and you become the battlefield. They attack you for carrying what they have disowned. They resent you for embodying what they abandoned. The danger for empaths is real, because these attacks don't always come as aggression. They often come disguised as concern, as advice, as guidance. You don't recognize them as attacks until it's too late. By then, the criticism has sunk in, the doubts have taken root, and you begin to wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe you should be less open. Maybe you should dim your light. But Jung's insight cuts through the confusion. These attacks are not about you. They are about the other person's shadow. They are about the qualities they cannot bear to see in themselves. You are the mirror, and the hostility directed at you is the hostility they feel toward their own abandoned truth. Have you recognized these types in your own life? The emotional critic, the authenticity attacker, the vulnerability violator, the light dimmer. Once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. You begin to realize how predictable it all is. How every criticism, every attempt to diminish you, every subtle jab is not random, but part of a universal psychological script. And here is where your power begins. Recognition. Because once you know what these attacks are, you stop internalizing them. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start saying, "Ah, I see the shadow projection for what it is." And that shift is everything. It turns unconscious attack into conscious information. It transforms hostility into insight. And it keeps your light intact. Jung warned that the attacks empaths face aren't just painful in the moment. They carry hidden dangers, slow, corrosive forces that can destroy the very qualities the world needs most. He called them the most serious threats to both individual empaths and to collective emotional evolution. The first danger is authenticity erosion. When you are told again and again that you are too sensitive, too intense, too much, the temptation to suppress yourself becomes overwhelming. You begin to mute your natural responses just to fit in. You start to second-guess your emotions. You hesitate before speaking. You hide your tears. And slowly, your authenticity erodes. Jung wrote, "The empath who abandons their authenticity to gain acceptance loses the very quality that made them valuable." Think about that. The very gift you bring to the world, your raw, unfiltered capacity to feel, is slowly extinguished, not because you lost it naturally, but because you sacrificed it to survive. Jung called this the dimming epidemic, a silent pandemic of light being hidden, of sensitivity being suppressed, of aliveness being abandoned just to appease a world addicted to numbness. The second danger is psychological self-betrayal. Jung saw it again and again. Empaths internalize the criticism they receive. They begin to believe the accusations. They attack their own emotional nature with the same violence others directed toward them. You stop needing enemies because you become your own. You tell yourself you're too much. You shame yourself for feeling deeply. You punish yourself for caring. Jung described this as the greatest tragedy of all, the empath becoming their own emotional assassin. The third danger is collective emotional stagnation. Jung was clear. Empaths aren't just individuals with unusual sensitivity. They are emotional pioneers. They are the ones capable of modeling what healthy emotional expression looks like. They are the ones carrying the flame of authenticity into a world that has forgotten how to feel. But when empaths suppress their light, the entire culture suffers. Jung called it emotional evolution arrest. Humanity's emotional growth halts because those most capable of leading it hide their gifts in fear of attack. So the danger is not just personal, it is collective. Every empath who dims their light doesn't just betray themselves. They delay the evolution of human consciousness. This is why Jung insisted on something vital. Empaths must not only survive, they must preserve their gifts. He called it the authentic self-preservation protocol. The first phase is recognition and validation. You must learn to see criticism for what it is: shadow projection. When someone calls you too sensitive, too emotional, too intense, you must understand, this isn't personal. It is their self-hatred being reflected back at them. Jung instructed empaths to interpret hostility as information about the critic's psychological state, not as accurate feedback about their own worth. This is projection immunity. It begins with a shift in perspective. The resentment I face isn't about me. It's about what I awaken in them. The second phase is boundary crystallization. Empaths are naturally porous. They absorb what others project. But Jung taught that you must learn energetic boundaries, the ability to maintain your authenticity without absorbing someone else's shadow. This doesn't mean hardening. It doesn't mean closing off. Jung called it psychological discernment, the skill of distinguishing between genuine feedback that helps individuation and projection-based attacks designed to dim you. Boundaries are not walls. They are filters. They allow love in, but keep projection out. Comment if you're ready to protect your empathic nature while serving those who can truly receive it. I choose conscious empathy over unconscious absorption. The third phase is selective engagement. Jung emphasized conscious relationship choices. You cannot share your light with everyone. Some will resent it no matter what. Some will drain you no matter how much you give. Selective engagement means connecting deeply with those who appreciate authenticity and keeping distance from those who attack it. It means finding what Jung called vibrational sanctuary, relationships where your light is celebrated, not criticized. It means building community with those who recognize empathy as strength, not weakness. Recognition, boundaries, selective engagement. 3 steps, simple in theory, but profound in practice. Together, they form a shield, a way for empaths to stay luminous without being destroyed by projection. A way to keep the flame alive, not just for themselves, but for the world. Jung understood the stakes. The suppression of empathic individuals represents humanity's unconscious rejection of its own emotional potential. That is why your light matters. That is why your protection is essential. The world does not need you to dim. The world needs you to preserve. Jung's insights didn't remain confined to the clinic. He looked to history, to art, to spirituality, to see how empaths across time either protected their light or were destroyed by the world's resentment. 3 cases stand out. The first is Saint Francis of Assisi. Francis embodied what Jung called authentic integration. He maintained radical empathy and emotional openness in a world that often preferred suppression. He was criticized by religious authorities who had turned faith into a purely intellectual exercise. They saw his compassion as naive, his emotional intensity as dangerous. Yet Francis never dimmed his light. He remained tender. He remained real. Jung noted that Francis succeeded because he recognized criticism for what it was, not a sign of his flaw, but evidence of his critic's poverty of spirit. Then there is Vincent van Gogh, a case of unprotected sensitivity. Van Gogh felt the world too deeply. His letters reveal his agony at being criticized for being too intense, too emotional, too much. He turned that sensitivity into art of staggering genius. But he internalized the attacks. He began to believe the voices that said his empathy was weakness. Jung analyzed Van Gogh as a tragic figure, not because of his sensitivity, but because he lacked the psychological protection to preserve it. He possessed the empathic vision of genius, but he became his own emotional assassin. And then Jung himself. He was not just a theorist, he lived this paradox. In professional environments, his depth of psychological perception often threatened others who preferred surface-level answers. He faced resentment for seeing too much, for refusing to reduce the psyche to something neat and controlled. Jung documented his own choice: either dim his light for acceptance or preserve it and face isolation. He chose preservation. He realized protecting his empathic gifts served not only his own individuation, but the advancement of psychological understanding itself. Jung also looked to myth. Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods to give humanity light, was punished endlessly for his gift. Christ, embodying compassion and truth, crucified by those whose hearts could not bear his radiance. The archetype repeats. The bringer of light is always resented by those who fear illumination. The empath story is part of this eternal drama. From history to myth, the lesson is consistent. If you protect your light, you become a source of transformation for others. If you fail to protect it, you risk destruction. This is why Jung developed the framework of light integration. 4 stages that show how empaths can not only survive, but thrive. The first stage is recognition without suppression. This is projection immunity. The moment you understand that resentment is not about you, but about their shadow, you stop taking it personally. Jung said, "Wisdom begins when the empath stops believing that others' inability to tolerate their light means they should dim it." You realize the problem isn't that you are too much. The problem is that others have become too little. The second stage is boundary development without hardening. Jung called it selective permeability. You learn to stay open while also protected, to distinguish between authentic emotional connection and psychological attack disguised as relationship. You remain open to love, but immune to hatred. You filter rather than absorb. The third stage is community creation without compromise. You stop chasing acceptance from those who resent authenticity. Instead, you build bonds with those who celebrate it. Jung wrote, "The empath's evolution requires releasing the need to be understood by everyone and focusing on being truly known by the right people." It's not about the quantity of acceptance, but the quality of connection. The fourth stage is service without sacrifice. Jung called this authentic service. You use your empathic gifts to help others without depleting yourself. You give from overflow, not exhaustion. You serve those who can receive, not those who resent. And in doing so, you create cultural healing. 4 stages: recognition, boundaries, community, service. Together, they transform the empath from victim of projection into sovereign bearer of light. They ensure that your gift is preserved, your authenticity is protected, and your energy is used where it truly matters. Jung's message is clear. Your light does not need to dim. Their capacity to receive must brighten. Jung was careful to point out that even when empaths understand projection and begin the path of integration, there are traps, pitfalls that can derail the journey. 4 in particular. The first is the revenge trap. Once you recognize how others have attacked your authenticity, it is tempting to turn the hostility back on them, to attack their numbness the way they attacked your aliveness. But Jung warned that this is learning the wrong lesson. Understanding projection does not justify projecting in return. When you attack others for their defenses, you become the very thing you once suffered from. The second is the superiority complex. Some empaths, armed with insight into shadow projection, begin to feel superior. They believe their sensitivity makes them wiser, purer, better. Jung called this enlightened arrogance. It may feel empowering in the moment, but it creates distance. It transforms the empath's gift into a weapon of hierarchy. The gift is meant for healing, not for status. The third is the isolation justification. Some empaths, weary from constant attacks, retreat entirely. They convince themselves that anyone who doesn't celebrate their light isn't worth engaging. They withdraw, not just from hostility, but from potential connection. Jung cautioned that isolation serves no one. True integration means staying authentic while remaining compassionately available to those ready to receive. The fourth is light dimming, the most dangerous pitfall of all. Even with full knowledge of projection, some empaths still choose to suppress their authenticity to avoid conflict. They know the theory, they understand the pattern, but emotionally, they remain afraid of resentment. Jung emphasized that intellectual insight alone cannot protect you. You must develop genuine inner strength. Otherwise, you still dim yourself, despite knowing better. These pitfalls are seductive. They feel like solutions: revenge, superiority, withdrawal, dimming. But each one is a form of betrayal. Each one moves you away from authentic light. The challenge is to walk the middle path, open but not porous, strong but not hardened, compassionate but not sacrificial, radiant but not arrogant. That is the path of true integration. And this is where Jung's vision expands beyond the individual. Because he saw empaths not only as people struggling to survive, but as carriers of something humanity desperately needs. He saw them as cultural healers. Jung understood empathy as more than a personality trait. It is a manifestation of what he called the feeling function, the capacity to stay connected to authentic emotional truth. In a culture dominated by repression and false personas, those who remain empathically alive become pioneers. They are proof that emotional death is not inevitable. Throughout history, Jung observed, empathic individuals served as bridges between humanity's emotional past and its emotional future. In times of collective numbness, they preserved emotional wisdom like keepers of a flame. When the world was ready, they modeled what healing looked like. Prometheus bringing fire, Francis living compassion, Van Gogh painting the depth of feeling. Each, in their own way, carried authenticity into a world that resisted it. This is why Jung described the empath as essential for collective evolution. If empaths hide their gifts, the world loses its pioneers. But if they preserve them, they become archetypes of the sage, figures who show that sensitivity and strength can coexist. Their light becomes medicine for a world trapped in shadow. Jung's words echo across time. We attack in others what we most need to reclaim within ourselves. When the world attacks empaths, It reveals its hunger for what they carry. The resentment directed at you is not proof that you are broken. It is proof that your authenticity matters. So the question is never whether others will resent your light. The question is whether you will protect it. Because when you do, you become more than just an individual surviving projection. You become part of humanity's emotional evolution. You become the living reminder that authenticity is possible, that empathy is not weakness, that the human heart can still feel. Your task is not to dim your light. Your task is to hold it high, to keep it burning, to carry it through the dark ages of emotional numbness until others are ready to see again. Jung believed this was the empath's highest calling, to be cultural healers, to keep the flame alive.